Welcome back, SmythOS innovators. In this video, we are taking our skills to the next level by exploring how to create powerful, reusable agents. We'll cover using agents as a plugin, calling agents via API, and we dive deep into agent settings and deployment options. Mike, can you start by showing us how to use agents as plugins with other agents?
Okay. This is, I know, something that can be rather confusing. Is this the only way that we can use that agent? Can anybody guess another way that we could use the text file creation agent? Let's see if we can get, I want to try and get at least one guess in. So this is actually using it as if it were its own LLM, right? Except now it's an LLM that can actually do something pretty powerful. So the other way we can use another agent that may have a number of skills or very, very technical skills that you wouldn't want to build out inside of every single agent that you're working with is to actually, can anybody guess? It's the same way you would use it if you were a developer and wanted to use a Smith agent inside of your code. All right. Is it API endpoint? Thank you. Great job, Sumbo. All right. We are going to actually call that agent as an API. So to do that, I need to actually know and go back to the other agent, right? So this was the simple text agent that we created here. At least I think it is. No, this is not. This is a different one. So let's go with training. I apologize, guys. In just a minute. There we go. So here, and this is so this is an important thing to understand about your agent now that you're actually working with a separate agent. This is where you can actually give it the settings for how this will end up being used. And by the way, fresh out of the oven is GPT-4o Mini in our list of available selections for your LLM choices. So this is where you can actually set the way that this agent will behave. And this is actually pulling this, if you remember, out of the description of the agent. But we can also set it here on our agent settings page. This is also where you can view the logs of when this has been run. You can also, for example, if you wanted to create a number of different agents.
That's fascinating. It seems like there's a lot of flexibility in how we can configure these agents. Mike, can you explain more about the different settings we can adjust?
And Bruno, I will absolutely get to your question. So this allows you to actually work with that particular agent and build out, for example, a list so that you can actually call that when you say bulk work. You can upload a CSV file, for example, that has the raw text that you want to actually call. So this is actually used, for example, if you have an agent that creates content and you have a number of topics you want to create content on, you can actually create a CSV file that has all of those. that CSV file can start off, for example, as an Excel sheet or a Google sheet, and then add that here, then call that. This is actually showing you what you have in your agent in terms of the pieces that are used to make it work. And this is the one that I love personally, because a lot of times I'm building agents that actually try to or need to actually run on a regular basis. Like if you remember, hey, I want to go ahead and index all the new files in the last 24 hours. I can actually choose an endpoint and then go ahead and provide it with the inputs that it needs, and then run on a particular day and time, and then go ahead and repeat that, for example, every once every day. In this case, it's repeat every week, but this will be every day of the week, and it's just going to go on forever and ever. And then name this as, there. And now this will actually run. I want to stop it before it actually does run. Sorry. That allows you to essentially have your agent run on a cron job for a particular endpoint, API endpoint, right? And so then when you want to use your agent, you want to, for example, have it work with chatbot, you want to turn that on, and this is where you have all of your settings for the chatbot, including the personality, in essence, what it's supposed to do and how it's supposed to do it. You can change some details here. If you really want to get fancy, you can actually also, when you deploy it, use CSS to further customize the look and feel of that agent. And then if you're going to deploy this as an API, and we do want to deploy this as an API in our case, that's there.
That's a great example of automating tasks with agents. Now, can you show us how to call these agents via API?
But when I go and look at this, what I really want is my Swagger API call, because in there I can actually get the link, right? So if I had different servers here, in other words, if I had the test server and the non-production server, that would be listed here, and then I can grab this. See, this little button here actually enables me to copy that, and then I'm going to go back to my issue expert and paste that here. And now, and see, the other thing I need to make sure and do, and we saw this on the first day, is what is this, right? What am I doing with this? Is it a get? Is it a post? And sure enough, it's a post, right? So I need to change my request over here to a post. And then in my content for this file, or basically in the body, I need to identify the content that I want it to pull in. And in my case, I actually need this to actually be the content for the file. Let's go back and take a look at our text file agent and see, here's the request body style that we need.
Amazing. So we can use Swagger to generate our API calls. Mike, can you walk us through the process of actually making an API call to our agent?
So we're going to go ahead and grab this, copy it, and then go back over to our issue expert, drop this in here. Here's our raw text, and now what we need to do is actually provide it with the input for that string. So we're going to pretend that this puppy goes away, and that we can pull that off of there and push this into here, but we need to take this out of debug and add an input. I'm going to call it what it was. I'm going to put that into here. And I'm going to name this. And so what this is going to do, this API call is going to call the latest, and I think this is going to answer your question here, Bruno. When you deploy this, we are going to use the deployed version of this and not the test version, if that makes sense, right? Which I think is what your question is. Is that correct? If this was a quote unquote real agent, first of all, what we would not be doing is using the test instance. We'd be actually using the production server. So that would be a CNAME from the subdomains. And then it's going to use the latest changed version. It will not use the version that's necessarily in your editor.
This is really helpful for understanding how to structure our API calls. Now, let's talk about deployment. What options do we have for deploying these reusable agents?
It doesn't, in other words, it doesn't stick with the old deploy. It uses the latest version when you are, so remember there are two ways. Let's go back to here. So there's two ways that you can actually do this, right? One is via the use of the agent as another agent, and essentially as a component, right? This component here, you actually refer to which version of the component you're going to use. The only options, go ahead, Bruno. Sorry.
Yeah, that's exactly what I mean. What if I update this agent, this referred agent? I mean, I can select dev and prod latest. What if I redeploy that agent? Which version is going to be used here? Can I create a new deploy, or if I redeploy in prod test, it's going to update this one?
Yeah. So this does not allow you to reference, for example, the particular version here. It only allows you to refer to the either the development version, which is the version that sits on that URL that has that wild and crazy name, or the production version. We are doing something we should not be doing. What we should be doing is using a different URL for our production deployment, but we are not doing that here simply because this is a classroom environment. Does that explain why it may feel confusing? Okay.
Yes, it's okay. Thanks.
Yeah, so just again, just so that people understand, when we are using the agent as in essence, another agent, that's this approach here, you can actually decide, do you want to use the dev version, in other words, the version that you're working on inside of your editor, or the last deployment or the latest deployment to production, right? So you can only deploy to production, by the way. There's deployments are to production, period. There's no deployment to stage, there's no deployment to UAT, none of that exists. This is simply either the version that's in your editor or the version that's actually deployed onto production. It's a little confusing because we are using what amounts to the same URL for production, or the same base domain for production that we are for our development version. If we had done this correctly, we would. So, for example, if we wanted to use the non-production version in our API call here, we would actually end up using this URL, right? Which is the same URL that's used for test. However, when you want to use the production version, you want to use the production URL.
That's crucial information for managing our agent versions. Mike, can you give us some best practices for deploying and managing these reusable agents?
Yeah, so just again, just so that people understand, when we are using the agent as in essence, another agent, that's this approach here, you can actually decide, do you want to use the dev version, in other words, the version that you're working on inside of your editor, or the last deployment or the latest deployment to production, right? So you can only deploy to production, by the way. There's deployments are to production, period. There's no deployment to stage, there's no deployment to UAT, none of that exists. This is simply either the version that's in your editor or the version that's actually deployed onto production. It's a little confusing because we are using what amounts to the same URL for production, or the same base domain for production that we are for our development version. If we had done this correctly, we would. So, for example, if we wanted to use the non-production version in our API call here, we would actually end up using this URL, right? Which is the same URL that's used for test. However, when you want to use the production version, you want to use the production URL. And actually, that's a good question. I want to make doubly sure here. So this is the server. By the way, this is what we'll be using in our next lesson to deploy to a GPT. So this is the server. What we should actually be doing is this list of servers should actually have the production server versus what we have here. So typically, you wouldn't use this. This is our test domain, and it's exactly the same as our production domain. That's not the right way to do things. So typically, you'd be able to easily spot it because your test would be the one that is essentially on the smyth.ai domain, and your production would be your CNAME. Okay. I hope that helps. Is everybody clear on that now? I apologize that I maybe should have set up a CNAME specifically for this, but it's also easier to test this way. So, yeah. So let's go ahead and go back to our issue expert here. When we make this API call, we're going to get raw text, and then let's actually go ahead and debug. It's just so people understand what happened right here. We've talked about how flexible and capable debug is with Smyth, but a lot of times it's hard to remember that you can start anywhere in a process, and if you've been debugging before and those values have been populated, you can start from, for example, here, and these are already in place, right? So we can go ahead and take a step here. That step would actually give us the raw text here. Let's make sure we've got, yep. So let's go ahead and debug step. That's going to give us this step here. All right. And then let's see what it gives us for a response. Nothing. So this did not work. That is essentially what that means. So we need to take a look. Oh, you know what we did? Can anybody guess what we did? It's just, I got distracted with Bruno's question and didn't finish what I was supposed to do here. Can anybody guess what I need to do here? I was in the process of doing it before. Anyone? I'm getting closer.
Input raw text.
There we go. So I forgot to do that. Silly me. A great reason why, using debug makes sense. So let's go ahead and stop and debug again. Step and step. And our response should actually have worked. What am I doing here? Let's go ahead and take a look at our log. So this is interesting because it should have given us back the URL when we called it. Let's take another look at the headers here. I want to make sure. Best laid plans of mice and men. I did this earlier today and it worked just fine. Okay. So I need to do some debugging here. Debugging is probably not the right word, but some look into what is going on. So do we want to try something really wild? Can I get some thumbs up or thumbs down one way or the other? Oh, that might be why. All right. I'm going to do something that's a little bit crazy. Okay. I'm going to go back to my issue expert. I've got raw text already here. And if I come over here, it's post there. And I think what happened is I had debug turned on, but I'm going to try and do something that's pretty crazy that you actually, yeah. Let's try this. So let me tell you what I'm going to try and do here. I'm actually going to try and debug this API call by attaching to it when it makes this call. So if I go into here and I stop the debug here and start the debug here. So if I step into this, it's going to start to make this call, but my other agent is sitting in a debug status. So I'm going to try and attach. So it actually attached and worked. Oops. Step. Okay. So what it should have done is completed. Let's go ahead and raw text, raw text. And I'm going to go ahead and stop.
Thank you, Mike. This has been an incredibly informative session on creating and managing reusable agents. SmythOS enthusiasts, you now have the knowledge to use agents as plugins with other agents. Call agents via API for seamless integration. Configure agent settings for optimal performance. And deploy agents with best practices in mind. Remember, the power of SmythOS lies in its flexibility and reusability. By mastering these concepts, you are well on your way to creating efficient and scalable AI solutions. In our next video, we'll explore debugging and troubleshooting techniques to ensure your agents are running smoothly. Keep experimenting, keep learning, and I see you in the next one.